Hi, everybody. It is exciting to have you here. And today we are talking with Christy McGill and Andre De Leon at the Nevada Department of Education, and Rebecca and I with Creating the Future, and just talking about the pretty wonderful work we got to do together for about a year in 2018 and continuing on now. So if we could all introduce ourselves by saying who you are, and what's been awesome in your life, a quick, brief awesome in your life since we last saw you. And I will start. I am Hilda Gottlieb with Creating the Future, and my awesome is that it is February 22nd in Tucson, Arizona, and it has been snowing all day, and we don't generally get snow, so we're like children today. So that is my awesome. Christy, what's been going on with you? Tell us who you are and what your life is in the Nevada Department of Education, and what's been awesome.
Yeah, Christy McGill. I am the director for the Office of Safe and Respectful Learning that is located in the Nevada State Department of Education. And my awesome is that I have the honor to present in front of the nation's first female-led legislature. So, it was awesome.
Wow. Andre.
Andre De Leon. I'm also part of the Nevada Department of Education team. My awesome, because of the snowy weather, we had a delay today in school and our state offices that allowed me to have breakfast with my two teenage kids this morning. So that's a very rare treat given their hectic schedules as well as mine. And we all got to sit around. We went out to breakfast this morning before we went to school and work.
Wonderful, wonderful. And what is your role within the department? Where do you play?
Where do I play? So I am with the Office of Standards and Instructional Support. I'm a education programs professional there, and I get to work with a great team of people from other content areas, and we just kind of meld them all into an integrated process, and it just works in a weird and wonderful way, and it's always great coming to work, even in the snow.
Even in the snow. And Rebecca.
Rebecca Hurd with Creating the Future. I am in McCall, Idaho, which is snow country. So in the spirit of snow, what's been awesome is our season so far, and it's just been amazing. Light and fluffy powder for those who enjoy skiing know what that means to have it in your face as you go down the mountain and are in the trees.
It is remarkable that we are all talking about snow, because that is a rare thing. And of course, when we talk about snow here in Tucson, we're like, oh, look, 4 flakes are falling from the sky. And you've got, what, 12 feet in front of your house, Rebecca? So, yeah, little bit of difference. I thought that it might help a little bit to talk about, just very, very briefly, Creating the Future's mission and how that has guided the work that we were doing together. Creating the Future is really about experimenting in systems change. And the very specific systems change that we are looking at, we're not looking at systems change in a very narrow way. We're looking at it very broadly, defining systems sort of as the way people do things. And so those systems could be cultural systems, the way we be with each other. They could be workplace systems, which is, I know, a lot of what we're going to talk about today. They could be community systems, which, again, I think we're going to be talking about today. But it's really just the way we do things. And so Creating the Future's mission is to look at systems as what would be possible if systems were bringing out the best in us, rather than so many of the systems that we see which are reacting to what's wrong rather than creating what's possible. Systems that are suspecting the worst in us, which we frequently see in workplaces, but we also see elsewhere. Certainly the legal system and the criminal justice system is also about suspecting the worst in us. Imagine if those systems were actually bringing out the best in us. So often our systems are rooted in scarcity And what would it look like if our systems were rooted in the fact that we do have enough when we join together? And so that's really at the heart of what Creating the Future is about. We are experimenting by looking at systems change in specific areas, and that's what we were doing with the Department of Education, with you guys. And then from what we learn from those experiments, we are sharing what we learn as broadly as possible. And that could be through education programs, that could be through conversations, and everything in between. I had someone ask me a couple of months ago, so very specifically, how do you share what you're learning? And my answer was, the only way I can answer that specifically is however we can. In whatever ways that we can share what we're learning, that's what we're about. So, and we have given ourselves, we started the clock ticking at the beginning of 2017. We've given ourselves 10 years on this experiment, so that at the end of 10 years to be able to look back and say, what kinds of systems change have we seen as people are changing the systems from suspecting the worst in each other and reacting to creating what's possible and bringing out the best in each other. So that's a little bit about Creating the Future and what we were all about. And it was truly a joy to be with you all and to spend so much time with the folks in Nevada. Maybe let's start with how this thing started. Christy, do you want to just give a little bit, and we can all chime in as to sort of the chronology of what happened and how did this start?
Yeah, it started, I don't know how many years ago. I don't think I want to say because you age me faster than I need to be. But really, I feel like Creating the Future kind of gave me some of the words and the thought processes behind what my soul felt and knew. And so I met Hildy in one of her first classes, or not first, probably mid classes in Tucson, Arizona. And it really spoke to me because it spoke to me. I was doing community organizing. I was running a nonprofit called Healthy Communities Coalition in rural Nevada, in a place that was hit really, really hard by the recession. We had people who were food insecure. We had a spike in our suicides with our males from 40 to 60, like 30 in a month, and we're a really small community. And we had just a lot of out of work people, you know, not recession type numbers, but depression type numbers. And so we were trying to kind of recover from this. And so the viewpoint of really how do we bring out the best in each other, and how do we not, you know, in some ways we, you know, in Lyon County, we had to heal. And so to bring this kind of vocabulary and this kind of way of thinking back into Lyon County really helped shift our work and gave us a ton of momentum. So for example, one of the things that we really focused on was looking at all people equally and what could we do together. And so for example, our food pantry really looked at the people who were utilizing the food pantry as assets, and what could they do to help us sustain the food pantry, because we were having a heck of a time of getting any kind of grants. And as people came through, we really found that those that used the food pantry became our leaders and helped us run the food pantry. And what we found out is that this kind of peer-to-peer and human-to-human approach, we got better results. We got more donations. We started bringing people in that were recovering from addiction, and their addiction rates fell. They felt supported. And again, it was nothing that I was doing. It was just creating this space to allow people to connect and work together in a very non-judgmental way, and really saying, you know, what kind of goodness do you bring to the table, and how can we move this forward? And so it felt kind of like rocket fuel to a foundation of collaboration that we already had, was this kind of the catalytic thinking and really looking at how do we work together as a community to solve a lot of these issues. So that was kind of the premise. When I took this job at the Nevada Department of Education, I found that I was welcomed by the most amazing people. And I also found that the climate wasn't as good as it could be. We were suffering from some high turnover rates and people feeling like their talents weren't being utilized or brought into, they weren't really contributing like they wanted to. And so I really felt like falling back on what I had learned with Creating the Futures to bring that in, and how do we look at a system of bringing out the best in our amazing state employees. You know, I think state employees get a terrible rap of, oh, they're just there because they get the pension and they get the, you know, it's not a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And I found completely the opposite. I found people here with heart, and just as much heart as the people I had in my food pantry. And I also found people hurting just as much as I found in our food pantries at times. And so that's when we turned to Hildy and Rebecca and her lovely group of volunteer team members to kind of help us be thought partners about how do we create a system that brings out the best in our staff. So that was kind of the genesis.
Yeah. And Andre, when did you come into that process that Christy's talking about?
So it was interesting because I come at it from everything with us is standards. So that means that it's basically laws. And so Christy's predecessor had a group of people who are working, working to have student safety standards put into the health curriculum. And so I worked, turned out briefly with Chrissy's predecessor, and basically they said we want to get these standards into the health curriculum. We had a bill passed saying that this has to be done. I kind of outlined the process. They said, oh, that's going to take too long, and they went off and did something. A couple years later, Christy comes back to me with the same thing and says, we need to get these into standards. I kind of went over, I did a cursory overview of the process. Christy said, okay, let's figure out how we can make that work. Because I know with standards, usually it's teaching students what to learn and how to learn. These standards were unique in which it was teaching students how to be and how to protect themselves. And while it's the right thing to do, we don't always know how to legislate what's right. So it was a tricky process to move through, but it was great for me because I was just it was amazing that this could all start from one person's horrific experience and turn this into a movement that could help other students not be in the same thing. So I was on board from go. It was just a matter of helping these great people do this work and then guiding through the legislative, hoops and, hurdles and stuff like that. So we moved through the process, and as we're moving through this process, it made me kind of, I'm not going to say I was skeptical, but this was something that I've never seen before. And so I got curious about how something could proceed from one person's horrific event to having personal safety standards taught to students so that they don't experience something like this. And Christy and her team kept talking about catalytic thinking, and they would drop in, and I was just like, wow. And I'd never heard of it before, but as I kept hearing more about it, the more I heard, the more I wanted to learn. So we moved through the standards process. They are now in law, in the process of being taught, implementations taking place, and we started talking about the work climate through the Coffee with the Chiefs meeting that we would have monthly. And I think a group of us has kind of said, we'd like to do something about this. And those meetings turned into our climate group, and it proceeded to, just let's find out what people are thinking around this. We got a lot of information around that, a lot of data, and then we decided, okay, well, now let's do something about it. Because it's kind of funny. I've only been here, so March 15th will be my 9th anniversary with the state, which means that I would have been with the Department of Ed about about 7.5 years. Here in this organization, because of the turnover to which Chrissy spoke to, that makes me, I think I'm in the top third as far as seniority here at this organization.
Wow.
In a lot of organizations, I'd still be a rookie, but here it's like, oh, wow, you've been here for 7 years? What happened back in the day? Well, let me tell you what happened way back in 2012. Those type of conversations I've literally had here. So anyway, we just kind of, it's just been a combination of seeing things, doing things, and then seeing the next thing, and doing the next thing. And, and this effort has actually gone further than a lot of efforts like this in the past. This is about my 4th one that I've been through, and this has already far preceded those efforts in duration combined. So, and that's a good thing. And I think it's kind of one of those things where I think this has lasted long enough that it's become more in your face. And I think the powers that be that usually derail things like this don't want to be the thing that derails something like this, because it could be the linchpin for all hell breaking loose, in my opinion. So that's basically how I came in, and I was fortunate enough to be part of the Catalytic Thinking 101 class, and I'm truly looking forward to hopefully participating in the next step this coming fall, and it's been really good because I actually had to rewrite my job description to accommodate this work that I've been doing. So it's been nice because sometimes in the past, I've been I've been in education for I guess about 30 years now, but when things stay the same too long, I get kind of fidgety, and this has kind of allowed me to, while holding the same job position, have a refocus and kind of a repurpose in the work. It's nothing, I've taught, I usually, most of my education experience has been teaching science. I've taught life sciences for most of my time teaching, but I'd make changes from first period to second period all the way, and people would look at me like, why are you changing? Because I always say, oh, I have to go plan, and it's like, you've taught the same thing for years. What do you have to plan for? You just do the same thing over and over again. Science changes, things change, and I've always felt the need to change in the job description, and this has allowed me to do that.
One thing, Andre, I was reflecting on as I've had the delight in working with you in your climate teamwork and in the Catalytic Thinking 101 cohort was your commitment, and everyone from NDEs, to notice I may feel good coming into work, though I'm acknowledging that other people in this system do not feel good walking through those doors. And the message continued to always be aiming toward, I want to create a system, within NDE, within the districts and the schools, where people are happy and excited to walk through the doors, whatever the doors are. And that has continued to be the drumbeat we hear from you and everyone in continuing to lead from the middle of so many different situations, meetings, popping a different question, noticing there are either conditions for success in this meeting or they're not. And if they're not, what am I choosing to say next to see that the people in this room don't know each other, or the people in this room have a million different reasons of thinking why they're in the room. So it's continuing to just simply become, when we talk about systems change, this is just the way I be when I show up at work. I show up through this lens of catalytic thinking, and the stories that come out of your mouth, Christy's mouth, and everyone from Nevada every time we talk is that the stickiness is there because you've chosen to change the norms, to change, this is just the way that we do things. If we don't like the results or how people are feeling is what it's always come down to.
Well, it's so interesting that when we first came on the scene officially, I mean, we've been in relationship with Christy for several years, but when we first had our big conversation, this was December of 2017. So a little bit over, just about a year and a half ago, a little bit less. And exactly what Andre and Rebecca, the two of you, are talking about is that there was a seeming disconnect between the curriculum that you're talking about developing, Andre, so that the kids feel safe, and what was happening throughout the system. So we had a curriculum, you had a curriculum for the students, but to feel safe and supported and nurtured and focus on social and emotional intelligence. But there wasn't a lot of evidence of that throughout the rest of the system. So people weren't treating each other in ways that made them feel safe and created the conditions, as you noted, Rebecca, those conditions for success. Those were not there. So that big question of what does it take to align so that the whole system feels that, and just chronologically, what happened after that is, and with support of the superintendent of education for the state, you all spent quite a bit of time in a variety of conversations to find out how people did feel. So I think that first step of listening was such a huge step for you all, and you took your time at it. I mean, the thing that I loved about what you did was that we talked, I remember having the conversation in Steve's, the superintendent's office, talking about, well, we'll do a survey, and talking about what does it really take to listen, and that some people may feel comfortable reporting out in a survey, but other people want to talk one-on-one, and other people want to talk in a group. And so Christy and Andre, could you talk a little bit about just that initial step of listening that you all did in the various ways that you did it?
Yeah, because
The huddles.
yeah, the huddles and the huddle. It was a tough thing to pull off because of there was just a huge mistrust in general going on, along with the kind of general toxicity that was literally in the building. And so the huddles had to accommodate everybody's comfort level around how they wanted to communicate what they were thinking. And so there was we spent a lot of time talking. I mean, from even logistically just setting up the dates and the fact that the decisions around whether they were going to be an all organizational or north-south, and if it's going to be north-south, how do we bring, those, make it one large collaboration as opposed to two siloed collaborations around the huddles. I mean,
and when you guys talk north-south, explain to somebody who doesn't know Nevada what north and south means.
So we have two state office buildings, one here in Carson City, our capital, and then one in our population center down in Clark County in Las Vegas. And so, and we're almost split personnel-wise. I believe we have more people up here than in Las Vegas. And that was a huge thing to have to work with, because the climate was NDE. I mean, while there was toxicity in this building, people in the southern office were experiencing it also. And we had to tackle it as an organization with the idea that there might be different solutions for tackling it because of since it's two different geographic areas. So, it was, it was a lot of time sitting in that room down in the hall, just like, talking about what these huddle, it was, and it was great. And now a lot of it was Christy and her team kind of driving it. And that's when I really started hearing about catalytic thinking. One of the unique things that was done is talking about, well, what would the huddle, what would the end product look like if everybody moved through the huddle process? And once we had those conversations, I think things started to flow more.
Yep. And even the process of listening and having other people listen to each other was really important, because even though we didn't come up with an action plan directly after the huddles, we could feel a change in the climate as we went through the process. So the act of listening itself, I think, again, and what I experience in our community, the act of listening, really listening, having these things go up on the board, and then having it acted upon by our leadership. And we were blessed with leadership that was open to it. Like you said, our superintendent and most of the deputies embraced this and really felt like they wanted to do something about the turnover rates. And we really felt this need to kind of embrace the internal NDE climate and also workplace equity, so that we were walking our talk, and so that when we turned and supported our districts, who then supports our school, that kind of support moved away from just plain old compliance to a more fulfilling, kind of teamwork approach of how do we support you? We really recognized that not only was the toxic here, but there was these toxic elements. And I don't think, I think this may be common across multiple education systems. I don't think it's just ours. This kind of blame and shame and pile on, like bad educators, bad education system, you're still not making the kinds of, improvement we want. It's somebody's fault. And it's just we've been down that road. It hasn't worked. So then how do we move from that blame and shame and, it's somebody's fault, to this kind of mutual responsibility between all of us and working together? And so we had a superintendent who really believed that we needed to kind of walk our talk first and get that good here, so that we can have that out-facing, supportive and moving toward moving away from just compliance and into collaboration and what that looked like. So,
and that's where I really kind of saw this taking hold, because that those lack of trust barriers were kind of starting to be broken down by that communication piece as far as leading the middle, because there had to be something where you had a mechanism, this being the huddles, where if you said something of value, it was going to be valued, and it wouldn't be dismissed because of the position you held within the organization. And then the other thing that we had to kind of keep saying over and over again as a climate group to everybody is that, and it's that grammatically incorrect sentence that I always like to say in here is they is us. And when we would hear the, well, they're doing, and then we had to come back with the, well, they is us. So now what are, the huddles were pretty, we didn't get everybody, but we got a lot of people. And I think we got a lot of people who didn't have a voice before speaking their voice around those tables, and that was a good thing. And it moved into our what I call our summit event in November, which really was some really great work.
Yes, it was awesome. It was awesome. One of the interesting things watching the process, the listening process from the outside, because that was you all taking that and running with it. There were several things that really stood out. One was the fact that you offered multiple ways for people to speak and to be heard. So there were the huddles, which were bringing people together. There were one-on-one conversations. There were the coffees with the chief, which I love, that the superintendent actually took time to talk to the humans in his realm. Imagine that. And if they wanted to answer a survey, they could. So just the openness to say people express themselves in different ways. Let's offer them different ways to express themselves. That was beautiful to watch. It was also really wonderful to watch what happened because, and you guys are talking about that, because you infused the language of catalytic thinking into those questions, that we are so often, I'm thinking about turnover. We think about turnover, we say, okay, how are we going to fix it? Do we have to pay more money? Do we have to give more benefits? We wind up in the blame place. We wind up with, we blame unions, we blame whatever we can possibly blame, politics. And we wind up in that spiral that happens when we're being reactive. And what you all did with the questions you were asking in the huddles, and if you have those exact questions, it would be fabulous to share them. But if you don't off the top of your head, I know it was a year ago, but you all, the first questions you were asking about was, what would good look like? Mm-hmm. And it just changed everything. And you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the actual questions were just that. We really felt like there was enough stuff that had happened to address some of their concerns. And so we did do that up front and had quick conversations. But then we quickly moved the huddle into listening about what good would look like, what would be the conditions needed for that good to occur, and so we talked about conditions, we talked about feelings, we talked about what it would look, feel, sound like, and really tried to get some concrete things going on. And, for me, one of the biggest successes of the huddles was that it laid the foundation for the equity work that followed. And, we grew an equity team as well. And we had this training that really went deep and talked about implicit bias. But without that work up front, without those huddles, without looking and listening to the conditions, and without building that trust between our employees, there's no way we could have had that in-depth training around our own implicit bias and how that contributes to, and how our implicit bias can be transmuted into the system that then, goes and affects our teachers and kids as well. So to me, that was one of the biggest success points, was the catalytic thinking and the huddles and the listening developed enough trust so that we really could tackle some of the difficult issues that education systems today have to talk about, and equity is one of those.
And I think that trust also fed into the conversation that we could look at ourselves as an organization and say that we have everything here in place and the people in place and where that could do this work. Because education has always been about chasing the resources that you don't have. And that kind of fed into our compliance, thought process as far as what our purpose of an organization was, because it's like, well, we get money from the federal government and from our state budget. We'll dole it out as we see fit, and then we'll make sure that the people we dole it out to comply with the rules and regulations before we give them the money. And the thing that we never stopped and asked ourselves is that for those people who don't get those resources, are those populations any less underserved? And once we started looking at that, and this is a slow process too, because we still have people who are in the mindset that we are a compliance organization, but this is really the first time that we're having conversations around the fact that we always talk about, yeah, we're here to serve the students, but we really don't understand what that means. And now I think people are starting to understand what being a public servant to those students and the people that serve them mean. I always, one of the things that always strikes me as far as all our society problems and issues that have stemmed from law enforcement is that on the side of every car that I've seen, I've been to a lot of cities and a lot of states, it does say to protect and serve. And all the issues that come around from society and dealings with law enforcement come from when it moves to a find and punish mode. And we are also falling into that trap by being a compliance agency. And so we've started to see that mind shift, like, oh, we are supposed to, and this is, and we're starting to have those conversations about what exactly does that mean and where our gaps are in doing that type of work.
Yeah, one of the really uplifting pieces about the listening and the huddles is that at least I got to learn, and then we also translated down that into listening sessions with our districts, at least our office around school safety and student mental health, is that I just felt like I kept uncovering amazing people everywhere we went. And so it just filled me with hope because we really have the people we need. I mean, in those huddles, yeah, they talked about, they talked about some of the toxicity that was going on, but they also talked about they truly wanted to serve their districts and the kids. I mean, I have yet to find a person here that said, oh, I just don't care. I haven't found it, and I haven't found it in our districts as well. And so, I think there's this myth out there that education draws these people that don't care, or I don't know what it is, but it's so far from the truth. And so if the truth is we have all these passionate, amazing people that want to make a difference, then how do we create the systems to enable them to do that? And, and some of it may have to be disabling some systems that have not allowed that to happen. Sometimes that compliance is so tight, it doesn't allow people to open up and to really bloom. And so, to me, the hopeful part of this in the listening was just finding out about the wealth of truly amazing people that the Department of Education in Nevada had, and then also in the districts, and then our teachers. And then you could take it right down the kids too. Amazing assets, kids that wanted to go to schools, that wanted to come to schools, that they felt loved and supported. And, and so you really start to think about this and it's like, oh my gosh, everyone's on the same page. It really is the system.
And we had a glimpse of how that could work well. I guess it was the 7th of November when we had kind of what I remember, I think it was called the drive-by meeting, the drive-by all-day meeting, where we basically had a room and the invitation just said, come when here are the times, come when you can, stay as long as you want, leave when you need to. And it was just amazing the contributions that we made in that setting. I was laughing because I was around the time that I was doing my instructional materials work, and I thought it would be amazing if we all did this type of work and have that type of setting. It was like, come, stay as long as you want, leave when you need to, and contribute, whatever way you can while you're there. But I think our inclination is to look at something like that and say, well, that would never work. Yet it did.
Well, and the reason it worked is because you prioritized the time it takes to build trust from the very, very beginning. So trust was built across the system with people and meeting them where they are in ways they'd feel comfortable, and continuing in the roadmap journey of the climate team work to be constantly communicating with everyone. It wasn't like, oh, we did a survey, lights out, and then some other thing gets disseminated 6 months later. It was, your words are now captured in this body of work that continues to move on. And watching those people come in the room and jump in, even at 2:30 in the afternoon after we've been going since 8, is, again, you did the groundwork to create preconditions for success, for someone to feel comfortable walking in the door and jumping in, because we had human beings getting everyone up to speed. Here's where we're at. Here's what we're talking about. And that was, again, people across the NDE staff all leading from the middle. It didn't matter what job function or role you're in. Your job in that room is to create conditions to support that human being to be at their highest potential if they are only there for 15 minutes. So people talked, and then they had to leave. And they were sad to leave. Yet it was, the invitation was so intentional in not just sending out an all staff email. All are welcome. There was so much work done by NDE leading up to that day that people did choose to come in. And if they weren't there, you communicated, here's what's going on. Here's what's going on. Here's other ways you can contribute. Because we know lots of people wanted to be there, but that day didn't work for them.
Yeah. Just to give some background to somebody who may be listening about what we're talking about that day. From the work that came out of the surveys and the huddles and the conversations and the listening, some major themes became evident, and we spent some time in October. So this is how many months after that? This is our initial time we were there was in December of 2017. And all of the huddles began probably around March, April is when things really started to roll with you all, and lasted through the summer. And it was at the end of the summer that those themes sort of came together. And in October, we spent some time facilitating with the climate and culture team to design the process that would come up with an action plan. Because it's not just, okay, here's all the stuff, what do we want to do? Because catalytic thinking is all about, here's where people want to be, what are the conditions that will lead to that? And so our spending time together in October to design the process, what became really, really clear in those conversations was the desire for the process to be inclusive. And inclusive meaning including the almost 200 people within the Nevada Department of Education, whether they were going to be in the room in Carson City, whether they were beaming in from Las Vegas, as many people as could possibly be there. Well, we were going to be meeting and planning for 2 days, and not everybody had the ability to meet and plan for 2 days. And so again, generally in those kinds of meetings, what we're saying is, well, you really need to come up to speed, because the stuff we talk about in the morning is going to be what we leverage in the afternoon, and the stuff we do in day 1 is going to be leveraged in day 2. And if somebody just shows up in day 2, then they're not, and we wind up coming up with all the reasons we can't. But because it was so important from a values perspective that we walk the talk, that this process walk the talk of being inclusive, what you're hearing in what Rebecca and Andre are talking about is creating conditions that would allow individuals to show up when they could, be there for as long as they could, be brought up to speed, feel like they didn't have to, well, I'll just sit quietly. No, if you're only going to be there 15 minutes, we want 14 and a half minutes of your brilliance. What would it take for that to be in place? And it really was, Andre, you say you've not been in a situation. I have not facilitated a situation that was that fluid, with that many people coming in and out over 2 days. And to your point, Rebecca, each of them saying, I don't want to leave. I've got to go, but I don't want to leave. This is too good. So just to give some background to folks, when we say, what was that day that we're talking about, and what was it that was going on? It was, again, that very deep intention of reaching for what's possible. And what was clear from everybody's conversation is, we want this to be inclusive. All right, if it's going to be inclusive, what does that mean for people who can only be there for a half an hour?
And that speaks to the other part of the powerful question. What do we want this to make possible, and for whom? And for whom we identified was people who can only pop in and out. So we had a conversation about the conditions specifically for the people who are only going to show up for a bite size. So the importance of asking and for whom every single time we ask, what will this make possible?
You've also heard, and I just wanted to sort of mention that as part of this project, two cohorts of folks at the Department of Education went through an intensive, several months long learning experience at Creating the Future Learning Catalytic Thinking. So I just wanted to sort of add that in there, that was another thing that happened. Christy, you were about to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think and I really see the catalytic courses that you just referred to as kind of the coaching of how do we shift our thinking and a way for a safe environment, a safe place to occur, to really kind of learn about this. And again, it's nothing, like you said, it's nothing earth-shattering, but it is taking a look at how do we move systems and how do we do that. And so having this coaching of learning about it, going and practicing about it, and then coming back and having the fellowship around, did it work? Did it not work? What did you do? And allowing that practice to happen in your personal life, so then it can be translated in your work life, which can be translated into systems. The other piece I wanted to bring up is after all the listening sessions and after this day happened, many of our colleagues of Andre and I are scientists and very data driven. And so again, we thought it was important to take some of the priorities that we heard about and to come up with some shared indicators. So, what would it look like in a year if we were successful in this part, and actually start plugging that in very systematically, so that if we continue to have this high turnover rate, of course, that's one of our goals and one of our indicators, right, is the turnover rates. But that there would be some consistency around what would a good climate look like, and if we reached it, here are some of the indicators, and being able to actually put that into our STIP, which is our State Improvement Plan. And so we did. Again, our superintendent was very supportive of this work, and he created another objective that dealt with climate and equity amongst our own organization. So what he used to call it was the care and feeding of the organization. And he did say that our initial education plan was neglect not to have that in there in the first place. And so by adding this was a really important piece. And so, yes, we listened, we were inclusive, but we also knew that in order for this to be systematic, we had to translate it into systems language as well, and to have that constant conversation between those two pieces.
Because it's like, it otherwise becomes that conversation of, okay, we talked about this, now what does this mean? And so I thought it was huge getting into our STEP. And I think and that actually I didn't find that to be that difficult, because once again, like the personal safety standards, it was something that was right and needed to be done. It was just more of, I think we get caught, I think as an organization, a lot of times we get caught up in, well, we can't solve anything, so we don't do anything, and we just react to anything. And so, and I think with this, it was actually pretty easy. I mean, you don't have to do everything in this process, but you can do one thing and then complete that and then move on to the next thing. And I think that was the reason why we were able to get, two sections of the STIP dedicated to this type of work, because it was just a need that needed to be done. And once we showed that if we can do one thing, then that gives you a better chance of doing the next thing than if you do nothing at all.
The other very concrete outcome, I think that this conversation helped lay the groundwork for, at least for our office, is the school safety piece that looked at more than school safety, that looked at more than police officers in schools, and hardening, putting up fences and all that, looked at when we set out to listen to teachers. Yes, they feel underpaid, but it's more than that. It's the climate they're working in. They're feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling like they do not have a team. They're feeling like they have to, many teachers in Las Vegas have had their class sizes increase exponentially. Not only does that have an academic impact, but it impacts them and the students themselves. So it, starts to corrode the climate. And so it has allowed us to take a look at teacher retention in a much more broader model than just we have to increase pay. Yes, increasing pay is important. And it's also important that our teachers have team members, that they feel listened to, that they don't feel overwhelmed every single day, that they want to stay and teach. I think we're hearing across the country that teachers are feeling burnt out. And some of them are saying not even burnt out, but they feel used because of all these different things. And it's not just pay. And so really, I think by this listening and by understanding, how do we bring out the best in not only the kids who are learning, but the adults who are teaching, and really focus on that climate as well. And so in our office, we really took a step back and said, we need to focus on the adults first. Like ASAP, sirens going, we need to focus on the adults in our schools and districts, and in a very loving and supporting manner. And then as a team, we can, support the kids as well. But for our office, that was a real, we really, this is something we need to attend to now. So that was, again, all this work of listening laid the foundation to be able to do that.
It's a really big shift, and in part, I'm smiling because one of the three core tenets of catalytic thinking is it's always about the people, it's never about the stuff. And yet we always want to just throw more money at it. Well, if we can't afford to pay teachers more, then we're just going to have to get used to the fact that it's going to suck. Instead of realizing, yeah, it's about the money, which is a thing, but it's also primarily about being valued, being respected, being nurtured, being supported, being held. And those are all human things. And those don't replace money because we do have to pay the mortgage. But they are, and study after study after study is showing that when people leave jobs, it is more frequently about the people part than about the money part. And that's, and yet we keep on trying to throw money at it. Go ahead, Andre, I'm sorry.
I was saying it goes back to something you said earlier about blame too, because I'm my content area is science, and science is one of those things you learn by doing. Mathematics also, and it's interesting because you have a circumstance where going back to the incredible class size issues that go on, especially in Clark County. And so how that looks on a day-to-day basis is you have a chemistry teacher, and chemistry is one of those things that you best learn hands-on. Reading about it, I tried it at one time. I didn't learn chemistry that way. And I don't think anybody does, or most people don't. Then you have, this was a teacher speaking to me, and she had 43 students in her chemistry class. Now, OSHA dictates that in order to be able to run a lab, you can only have 28 students in there. So that means that her chemistry class is now went from being a lab class to basically a de facto lecture class that maybe is supplemented by the occasional PowerPoint and occasional video. And then the backlash of that is somebody comes and looks at it and says, this teacher doesn't understand how to teach science. You learn science by doing, and then he gets the backlash of a circumstance that she didn't create. And this happens all the time.
Wow.
So if you just start by stop blaming, that would be a huge step in furthering this process, and start looking at the circumstances that are there that were created by somebody other than her that resulted in her getting blamed for a situation that she didn't create or can do anything about.
Entree. I was wondering if you could share the story about the shift you've made in the instructional material, the process in which you've kind of flipped it on its head, or away from how this is just the way we do things, to engage the wisdom of the human beings in the districts. So could you talk a little bit about that, kind of the decision you made, what, the shift you made, and where you were at in that journey with these people?
All right, so I started off as a science person here, and then you get those duties as assigned. And part of it was, and so this particular duty I inherited, being the lead for the instructional material adoption for the state, was something I inherited due to a turnover issue that happened. So it all is related, right? So anyway, so this landed on my plate, and so I did what I usually do when something lands on my plate after the initial is doing this way. The initial answers were, well, that's the way we always do it. And I kind of moved along with it because, being new and and then it became very real as far as this maybe shouldn't be the way we're doing this, because so basically the instructional materials adoption process is that a district looks at a material, comes across the material, they try it, they like it, they move it through their public review process, the district gets on board, and then they submit it to the state to be approved by our State Board of Education. So it's in all, it's probably like about 1.5 to a 2-year process to get an instructional material approved. And so that last 6 months to a year is what I used to call the waiting game, where the district sends it off and then they cross their fingers, hoping and praying that the State Board of Education approves it. And up until maybe about 3 years ago, things just kind of moved through, and it was rubber stamped until we would get, we looked at materials and it was like, wow, this material isn't that great as far as serving our students. And can we say no if we don't believe it's great? And the law says we could say no. And so there were a couple materials that we made a recommendation to the board not to approve. And then that put those couple of districts in kind of a hissy, because it's like, we went all this, and it's like, and granted, I guess I could have sat on my high horse and say, well, the material was lousy, so we got rejected. But the thing is, having been there and done that wasn't fair. Why do they have to sit and wait, and then they have to, keep their fingers crossed? And they're putting a lot of time, resource, and money through this effort just to find out at the very end that they got a no. And granted, it was only 2 no's in a process where probably 98% of the materials were approved. But in a situation like that, when it happens to you, one time is too many. And so I said, well, can we flip this and bring everybody in the process, where then a recommendation is made to the board, and then everybody knows the decision because they were part of it going along, and then there's no surprises at the end. And nobody said, no, you can't do that. So that's what we did. And so I reached out to all the districts and with this crazy idea, and they said, yeah, okay. And I spoke before about the trepidation. There's always been trepidation in each part of this process, because and this trepidation is I truly understand how this is felt, because I know there's been a number of efforts where we as a state have brought people in to say, hey, you know what, we want your eyes on this, we want your opinion, we want it, and then it's like, you know what, you weren't really thinking what we were thinking, we're going to go ahead and make this decision, and we just wasted a lot of it. So I know that we've had that history. And so part of what the great thing about this work is I truly don't have to do it by myself. It's truly a team effort. It's what we call the instruction materials steering committee made up of those district people. It's about to get larger because when we start taking on the reviewing of content areas, we're going to have to bring in those content area specialists to look at these materials. My only job is just to keep convincing people that the they is we, and keep making decisions and progress with that premise. At no point did I ever say, you know what, you guys, this is not going to work. We're just going to do it this way, even though I know for a fact they have looked at me to do that, good, bad, or indifferent. I've always said, you know, when they keep saying, well, the state should just, I was like, well, you know, right now we're the state, so what are we going to do? And so we're starting small. We've only are reviewing 6 through 8 mathematic materials this year in our pilot. The rest of the materials are going through the same process as we've done in the past. And it's been funny because having those two processes go on at the same time is really, I think, woken all of us up to the, I don't know, idiocracies, hypocrisies of the situation that we've had in the past. And so there's now a bigger push to move this pilot through so we can get to the new process. But you know, these things do take time, and we don't want to just rubber stamp and thinking, oh, this is great, and then we don't look out for all the holes. So we're in the process of kind of doing those final fine-tuning parts. We just had a meeting about a week or so ago with our group, where a lot of hard questions were asked, and a lot of, as one of my colleagues says, those what ifs. And those what ifs is something that we just put on the table and we discuss them. And as we keep doing that, I think people are gaining that trust in the process and that they're a part of the process. And we're going to have another meeting in the next couple of weeks, and we hope to just continue to keep moving it to making a decision come the beginning of May in regards to those piloted materials. And if that all goes well, then we'll go full board with the already previously agreed upon 4 content areas for next year. That's another thing, is we all decided that we're not going to do more than our capacity allows. So we're not going to do anything and everything at all times. We're going to kind of hone the process because, you know, everything doesn't really need to be done yesterday is what we've decided. And so that's where we are.
Andre, just a quick, that story is incredible for so many reasons that we could talk about that for the next hour, yet it's also saying, a lot of times we can say, what can we carve out right now? What is it that we feel comfortable in working at a healthy and human pace can we carve out? And one story you shared with me about this some time ago was also when you were calling together a meeting with all these people, with all the wisdom from the district. Someone asked you a question and your response was, I don't know. That's why we're having the meeting. So the freeing up of this expert mode that we all, oh gosh, I have to have all the answers, or it's coming out of the Department of Ed down out into the districts, is you're honoring people and saying, I don't know. And that's why else would I call you together if I didn't know there was brilliance amongst all of you, and what that does to trust and feeling valued.
Well, and it's also in my mind, you know, you mentioned there's a million things in that story. You're right. We could spend another 2 hours just on that story. It is such an example of leading from the middle. Many people in state offices, departments of education, not alone, but many state offices, frequently look at the hierarchy and say, I can't do that. It's got to wait until it comes down from above. And feeling powerless and feeling like the power comes down from wherever, and being subject to a political process you all have just experienced, where a new governor comes in, the superintendent is an appointed position, things shift, and so it's very easy in those circumstances to say, well, yeah, we're not sure because the big guy is going to leave and then we can't do it. And what you're talking about, Andre, is taking something on that you have the absolute power to do. And could you all talk we've only got about 5-7 minutes left, but if you could talk briefly about what you've experienced in terms of both yourselves and possibly watching others lead from the middle. What difference has that been making for you all?
Yeah, it's to me, it's a huge, it's really important. And I never, in community organizing, leading from the middle is where it's at, right? Because we're coming together and there's stuff to do. And so in some ways it feels natural and it's easy. So when I got to bureaucracy, I really noticed bottlenecks in work and bottlenecks in time. And, if it's a bureaucracy, everything has to kind of come through and, do all this kind of stuff. And what I really found in the listening session is this underutilization of the amazing talents that we have right here. Like we actually have, collectively enough to really move some of these educational reforms forward. And so what would it look like if we started to be able to lead from the middle? We talked with our superintendent, or I talked to our superintendent about this, and it would require trust and safety and all those kinds of things, because we are a governmental entity and we do have issues like accountability and lawsuits and all this and that. But with that being said, that leading from the middle point is absolutely essential, because there's so much work to do. If people don't feel empowered to do the work they need to do, then nothing's going to get done. And so I really think, and again, we're not there yet, I really think this is a time to explore. But I love it when our superintendent was leaving, his last words to us was, don't contract back here, run out into the field. And do, just because there's no leadership right now, run out in the field and do, and don't fall back and retract and wait. And I think we were blessed to have that kind of leadership. And I think because even when a new leader comes, I feel like because so many of our colleagues have embraced this kind of lead from the middle mentality now, I think it's going to be really hard to go back to this very one communication. Now, of course, we have plenty of room for improvement. But I think that leading from the middle piece is really important about kind of opening things up and creating that space for things to get done. And it also allows for the voice of our students and our teachers to come through, which is the solution to our equity issues in education. And so, if not all the policy has to come from the top, that good policy comes from the bottom, and it's good communication from our leaders. And I don't even like to say top to bottom. Let's do here to here, right? Yeah. It's a woman-led legislation in Nevada, so we can change the hierarchy, right? It's from here to here, no longer here to here. So we have everyone at the continuum. If those voices are honored, then we're going to actually get to equity. So I'm very hopeful.
Well, it's been interesting to listen to conversations just with all of the team members that we have been talking to, because what we're finding is that people are leading from the middle in something as simple as just asking a different question in a meeting. And we all have that power. Somebody's listening to this conversation, and they're in a state government, they're in perhaps a Department of Education someplace. They want to start making change. They want to start looking at things differently and creating different systems. What is something that somebody can do right now that you found is just a small thing that somebody could just do right now?
I guess understand the difference between reaction and creation. Because I see organizations get in the mode of just reacting to things as they come, I'll deal with that when it comes across my desk, as opposed to the anticipation and the creating of a process. And that was kind of, that made my work in moving the instruction materials, the standards, whatever, easier because of that understanding.
How about you, Christy? What would you suggest?
Probably teamwork. The ability of a team and to move things forward is essential, especially when you're talking about equity, and creating that space so people can come in and work together, and really just talking about what are those conditions needed for a team and that space to occur. And, you know, what you'll find is the answers are in the room. You know, you don't need these high-powered, very expensive presenters to come in and tell you those. Start with the questions. What are the conditions to bring out the best in people? And, you know, you don't need a PhD to ask those questions. What you need is the time and space. So start with the questions and then build your team.
How about you? I'm sorry, Audrey, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted, and I think also why are you doing that? Because, you know, Chrissy said something that made me think, like, because everything is always, well, you need to be here at this time and da-da-da. It's like, well, why? And if it's because we've always done it that way, then you need to start moving to the type of questions that Chrissy's talking about.
Yeah. Rebecca, how about you? If you had one takeaway for people, what would you say?
It was on the same lines as Christy, because a friend was lamenting yesterday about a woman who she's been working with for years and how much time she spends trying to prepare for a conversation, like how to couch something. And I asked her, have you ever had a conversation about what are the conditions that would bring out the best? What would be helpful for you to know about me? And because so often when people come in as a new hire, the question may be, what is your managerial style? And, you know, and it's like, oh, I don't micromanage, like, and that's then, oh, we answered the question. This is what I prefer. Versus, like, what do you need to be comfortable to, you know, fire at all cylinders to have the best out of you? And if you haven't had that conversation with the people you are in current relationships with, what would it take for you to sit down and have that conversation? Because things will then change.
Wow. And if I had one quick takeaway from what we've been talking about today, I frequently talk about going where the water's warm, that you don't need to fight every battle, and we have heard you all say that several times during our conversation today. Do what you can, take the piece that you can bite off, and the agreement. I love what you both were saying, the agreement to work at a human pace and to say this is what we can do right now, and to say this is going to be a pilot project. And we're going to show everybody what comes out of it, so that maybe that we can move on from there. I want to take just a moment to thank you both. This has been one of the most joyful processes to work with you all and to watch what has been shifting and to see that things really are shifting. And looking forward to 6 months and a year from now coming back and asking, okay, so what's different? So for now, thank you all so much, and it was wonderful. Have a great rest of your day.
You
Thank
guys
you.
too.